Welcome to the Brothers Random Show. My name is Travis.
I'm Michael.
And we are two ordinary brothers discussing extraordinary ideas and some random shit. So the topics on this show range from theology, masculinity, movies, pop culture, books, and many other subjects. We often talk about people we admire and the wisdom they share, people such as Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, who we believe is the sage of our time. Michael, why are we here?
Well, today we are talking about Beauty and the Beast, and we have a guest on that's going to talk with us about it. Heather, my sister-in-law, is coming on to help us talk about Beauty and the Beast. So, Heather, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You are our first female to come on the show.
Glass ceiling break, right?
Yeah, glass ceiling break. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Utah, born and raised, dyed in the wool American, conservative. Honestly, I love stories, especially folk stories and fairy tales throughout history. I love how they shape culture and ideologies and social structures within societies.
That makes you the perfect person to have on about Beauty and the Beast. Michael and I both love the Disney cartoon. I have to admit I don't know much about the original, but I love the archetypal structure of the original Disney cartoon, the 1991 movie, and so we have been itching to talk about that since we started the show, and we really wanted to have a female perspective on it. So that is why we've invited you on, and so we'll get right into it. Just tell us what do you love about that particular story?
Well, the Disney version from 1991 is one of the best versions I've ever seen, read, come across. It's very similar to the original, except for one major change. In the original, the Beast has learned to be civilized before Belle comes, and it still works. It works very, very well, because a lot of people think of the statement from C.S. Lewis that something has to be loved before it is lovable. In the original, it kind of implies that a man must make himself lovable to win the love. And so he actually spends years cultivating himself. So when she arrives, he's already a gentleman. He does have a bit of a temper, though. The temper is still there. You can tell that when her father arrives, it's quite similar. But there are a few changes, but they did an excellent job on keeping the themes in the 1991 animated classic.
The intro to this story, it's kind of amazing to me that we don't get the grandiose fairy tale intro like that, like basically ever. The music that's playing and the guy's voice that's just kind of setting up the stage, bar none, it's just, you're already like right there, and it's already opening up this story with the visuals. One thing I noticed, I was watching it just last night, there's nothing that I really could put my finger on that dated this movie. It truly was built and made timeless. There's a lot of movies out there that are, fairy tale, medieval setting, and you can kind of tell from the music, you can tell from the hairdos or something, like, that was made in the 80s, or that was made in the 90s, right? My wife and I were talking about it, but basically the only thing that we felt like brought you out was when the Beast turns into his human self and he's basically Fabio, and we're just like, okay, that's the 90s.
Well, it's aged well. I would say it's aged well, but because you know, when you watch it again, some of the animation is a little older looking, but it really does a good job of holding up for a movie that's, what is it, 30 years old now? That's a 30-year-old movie.
Yeah, 32 years.
32 years. Wow. So
Heather,
Heather,
we had talked
go ahead,
a
Michael.
little bit. Go ahead. We had talked a little bit of it seemed like they were building two different archetypes in the villain of the show, which is Gaston, and the Beast. Talk to us a little bit about the differences, like those two different characters.
Well, both of them are, I think, the archetype of a sub-archetype of the dangerous man. One of them, though, is very shallow. The Beast starts out that way. You're told that he was very selfish and everything like that. But when he is made himself into beast form, you see him slowly coming out of that. And one of the biggest things is that he shares with Gaston is his preoccupation with looks. If you notice in the story, he, at the beginning of the narration, it says, ashamed of his monstrous form, he concealed himself inside the castle. And then later on, when he asks Belle to dinner and she rejects him, he says, she'll never see me as anything but a monster. And as the show progresses, you see him start to dress. He starts to kind of regain that humanity until his beastly form, to him, at least his outward form anyway, you can see him kind of forget that. Gaston never does. Gaston is always shallow. He's always selfish. And I have something on this that a lot of people forget, is that women inspire men to be civilized. Belle inspires the Beast. However, a woman cannot inspire a man to be something he chooses not to be. If Belle had said yes to Gaston, she would not have made him a better man. He would have become even more brutish. He would have tried to control her because he didn't want her love. He didn't want to be a better man. He already thought he was the best version out there. And if she had said yes and supported him, he probably would have become some kind of mob boss tyrant of that town, and done all these nefarious deeds anyway. Well, the Beast, he chose to be better. And so her inspiration, kind of like a woman can only inspire a man to be a greater version of what he chooses to be. And so you see this archetype that starts out very similar, but then one has some depth and goal to it, which I think the Enchantress saw. And in the live action, everybody asked, why did the Enchantress do that to Gaston? And you're like, well, she should have, but at the same time, I don't think it would have worked anyway. Mm-hmm. He would have just kept going.
He was going to be evil regardless.
He chose to be evil. Yeah.
Yep. And I did notice that in the beginning, they were showing a few things that just kind of made them the same, right? And through choices, and I noticed this, that through the company that they kept, because if you notice that in the beginning, you've got the Beast servants all instructing him, you must learn to control your temper, right? They're all kind of instructing him. They're all cheering him on, right? They're if there's a brutalization within the home, within the castle, if there's a brutalization within the castle, a man's kingdom, right? Then the people that fall within the sphere of a man's kingdom,
the tyrannical order,
want him to be better, right? They don't want him to be a tyrant. They want him to be better. And they were encouraging him along to become something better.
Well, and it's opposite with Gaston, where he's being told that he's already awesome.
All the villagers lining up. Everyone wants to be you, Gaston.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That whole song.
Well,
all the villagers lining up.
LeFou, I think, represents another aspect of masculinity, the weak in stature and weak in character. Now, Gaston is weak in character, but not stature. Whereas the beast is strong in both. He just needs guidance in both.
Well, it's funny because LeFou actually translates to the fool.
Yeah.
So Gaston continually listens to the fool.
To the fool. That's interesting, isn't it? What a brilliant way to put out these archetypes of all these different characters. And they do it to the female as well. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but Belle is the divine feminine archetype, but they're called the Bimbettes, the three sisters.
Yes.
They are the toxic female stereotype, right? Archetype. They are shallow, beautiful, and dim-witted. And those are the opposite of Belle. So it's to a lesser extent, but I would argue that the movie and probably the fairy tale in general is trying to put forth the possibilities of both sexes, where here you are, you've got two types, and you can go two different ways. You can be a Gaston, or you can be the beast. You can be Belle or the Bimbettes.
Yeah, it's interesting because the archetype of Belle is the divine, but she's also the mature lady. Through the entire show, she is constantly polite, even to Gaston. She always says please and thank you, even to the beast. However, her inner emotions, her love, she does not give it until they treat her well, until they treat the people around them well. It's not until the beast actually says you're welcome, when she thanks him for saving her life, that you start to see this change.
Yes.
He matures. Gaston kind of stays in this high school jock type. Oh, praise me. Everything is shallow to him. The praise is shallow. If flattery is what he asks for, what he wants, not true compliments. Belle, it's actually interesting you mentioned the Bets, because in the original fairy tale, she has two sisters that kind of are that archetype. They want shallow clothing, they want feminine things, but it's always outwardly feminine. While Belle asks for a rose, and that's how her father actually gets imprisoned, as he tries to take a rose from the beast garden. And so you can't
go ahead.
No, that was basically
that was it. Okay, so I wanted to just kind of explore that a little bit more. So it's interesting that you said she says thank you, and it's very important in today's society that women appreciate men, because there isn't any appreciation for the men. We get these dumb incels like what's that MGTOW, Michael? That stupid
MGTOW, men go their own way.
So it's really important that, and we see this in our society, because women have stopped appreciating what the sacrifice that men do for them. And that's why we have this battle of the sexes just kind of ripping apart. And I'm not trying to condone any of this behavior, but the beast, the
pushback on that, Trav, would be that before she thanks him, he actually risks his life to save her.
Yes.
Right. And that
but she also wins. She wins an argument with him as well, because she's right.
Well, actually, from a girl's perspective, that argument is actually kind of setting them up as equals in my mind, because they both make very, very legitimate points. She shouldn't have run away. And a lot of people forget that in the 1991 animated classic, it is her word that she gives. She even says when she runs, promise or no promise. So she runs when he terrifies her. And so when they're arguing back and forth, he says, well, you shouldn't have been in the West Wing. She shouldn't have been. And she said, well, you should control your temper. So it and you see them actually in the animated style doing this. They're moving together, and it's this back and forth. And so it kind of established, he loses his temper. She gets angry at him, but she doesn't lose her temper in that scene. She gets you should learn to control your temper. And they have this theme throughout the whole thing that you can be angry without losing your temper. And it kind of establishes them as equals on this, because she
totally
now put
does.
forth her boundaries. Yeah.
It totally
and so,
establishes them as equals. It totally does.
Yeah.
This is what I think is so important about this movie, is it totally establishes them both as equals. She wins the argument and he relents because he knows that she's right. But in the same moment, she thanks him.
right.
And that's important. That's an important little side note that we're all missing in our society. So the two most important scenes in this movie to me are the scene where she gets confronted by the wolves, and then the scene immediately after where she's nursing his wounds. Now they both save each other, but in different ways.
Right.
He saves him in the feminine way, and he saves her in the masculine way. So if you take this all as metaphor, which the early stories, early fairy tales were meant to be metaphor. So if you take this as metaphor, the wolves represent basically the evil of the world. And she is attacked by the evil of the world. And women who are vulnerable, especially during child gestation, especially when they're pregnant, they're vulnerable, and so they need a man. Excuse me. They need a man to be there, to help out and to protect. And they need to be also appreciative of that. At the same time, the man needs to have that little bit of beast in him so he can fight the wolves, but not so much of a beast in him that he's also causing havoc on her. He's got to have he's got to have that line right down the middle, because if he's weak like LeFou would never be able to fight the wolves. Gaston is strong and would have been able to fight the wolves, but his narcissism won't allow him to care for a woman like Belle, and help raise children with her. So this is very interesting because it has all these metaphors for how relationships are supposed to work. And then the argument, she wins the argument, but she also thanks him. And it's those two things are so important in this scene and in relationships in general, because she can be the equal, but she also needs to recognize the sacrifice.
Well, it's his response as well, because he doesn't sulk. He doesn't gloat when she says thank you. At the beginning of the scene, he's kind of sulking in his chair because he got hurt.
Yeah, because he got hurt.
She says, when she says thank you, he doesn't say, well, you see, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah, you should thank me. It's a simple, very gracious, you're welcome.
Yeah.
And that's usually what all women want when they say in the appreciation back is you're welcome. They don't want the arrogance or anything coming back into play. Ego is okay because he can recognize he saved her. And that's what he did. Yeah. You're welcome. I would do it again.
Yes. Yeah. Wow.
And from that moment on is when the love can blossom.
Right.
So they have this pushback back and forth, right? And then they kind of settle in their thanking, in their kind of you're welcome, right? Mm-hmm. In that understanding with each other. And then they're actually allowed from there to be able to blossom a love relationship.
Yes.
The structure of the story is so good because after this confrontation, he saves her from the wolves. She says thank you. He says you're welcome. It feeds back on itself to grow, because immediately after that, what he wants is he wants to do something again for her. So he starts thinking, and that's when the library comes in. I want to do something for her. He's already done something for her, but because she was appreciative, he wants to do it again. And then she's appreciated again. Thank you so much is what she says. And then he wants to do something again. And then she's appreciative back. So they kind of feed back and forth, and it grows bigger and bigger. And it could be infinite amount of love continue to grow as long as like he continually to serve. She's continuing to be appreciative of it and thankful for it. And you see this in real life. Versus a husband, he goes out to work. If the wife is appreciative, he wants to go out to work more. He wants to do more for her. She becomes more and more appreciative, and it kind of feeds into this loop that continues to grow.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, it's so interesting.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I didn't think of a
loop of love.
The loop of love. Like, yeah, it's like he's feeding back into when she's appreciative. Yeah, and so it makes him happy to do things for her.
Yeah.
When she appreciates what he's doing. So if she had just been, if she'd been like the Bimbets, she would have been like, "What is this? The library? I don't care about the library." And then he would have been like, "Oh, crushed," right?
Right. Or she would have demanded more if she was a Bibet. Nothing would have been able to satisfy her. Well, everything the beast does satisfies Belle, and that's why he wants to do ever more.
Wow, that's such a that's why we have you on.
That's why
you got that woman's perspective, and we would have been just two dudes 100%. Talking about a romantic movie.
Well, as we kind of watch their love grow, it gets to the point where the beast lets her go. She wants to go help her father.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of the culminating of the beast, right? The arc for the beast is that he's selfish and unkind and
controlling.
He grows to love her. And then he does this unselfish act of letting her go and letting her
relinquishing the control.
Yeah, relinquishing control. Yeah.
Yeah, he releases her from her promise to stay, because Gaston would have been brutal. He would have physically prevented Belle from leaving. She's bound by her promise, so for him to release her from her promise, you can see halfway through the show there she could have left. She could have broken her word and left. I mean, I know she did because she was terrified before, which actually makes it better because women aren't perfect. They don't portray Belle as perfect. It's just subtly done. She is a good woman, but when she's terrified, she breaks her promise, but then she decides to keep her promise. And that's why, and there's these hesitations. When the beast collapses in the snow, she turns to get on her horse. She's going to leave. And then she stops and she goes back. The scene where he lets her go structurally is also very, very good because it mirrors the scene earlier when she gives herself up for her father. She hesitates and then she steps forward and says, "Take me instead." There he hesitates and then he steps forward and says, "You are free to go." And so there's this really mirrored dynamic there where you can see him learn to put somebody above himself. And it's really well done. And she even does the whole where she turns back. And that too is very, very good. Very, very well done. Well, and you're right. He relinquishes control.
Romantic. It when she looks back, it's more of a romantic notion.
Well, again, it's an appreciation. She looks back and puts her hand up upon his cheek and then runs and goes. So even that she said thank you.
Wow, that's a great take on that. Yeah. This is a little off topic, but to further the conversation, what do you think about this postmodern BS about how this is only about Stockholm Syndrome? Have you heard this?
Yes, I've heard that, and it makes me chuckle because Stockholm Syndrome, the only way it would have been Stockholm Syndrome is just if she had said yes to Gaston. Stockholm Syndrome is when you sympathize with not the motives of your captor, but the means of your captor. Belle never once sympathizes Okay, first they remove, like a good example is it's in the live action remake. I don't know if you've seen it. Anybody who hasn't seen it, don't even bother. But they remove one thing in it to try to make it less Stockholm Syndrome, and it makes it worse. And that's the promise. Belle's physically kept a captive. She never gives her promise. She even tries to escape. And then when I was watching, I was like, why is she not continue trying to escape? She's not bound by her word anymore. She's not bound by anything. Why is she staying? And then she continually tries to reach the beast, even though he's being very, very rude to her. Why? No girl worth her salt is going to, with any self-respect, is going to put up with that kind of behavior. In the animated classic, that one scene we talked about after the wolves, she gives it right back to him. Well, you should stop. You should have frightened me. And you have this dynamic that goes back and forth. So she puts her boundaries as well. And they mention also in Stockholm Syndrome, it's basically a brainwashing. Belle is never brainwashed. She has never thought that the beast's behavior when he was being brutish was okay. So to say it was Stockholm Syndrome is very, very ridiculous. And we would have to throw away most of romantic stories out if that was the case.
Because they all kind of deal with the it's kind of a captive capture kind of scenario.
Postmodernism is kind of a Marxist idea of there has to be an oppressor and an oppressed. So in Beauty and the Beast, well, Belle must be oppressed and the beast must be the oppressor. Therefore, it's Stockholm Syndrome. When you realize Belle's not oppressed and he is not an oppressor. And the story, the beast was being unfair with Maurice, but he did have a legal point. He trespassed. He says that in the show.
Well, and in the original, he steals a
rose.
The rose.
It's
so
petty.
Yeah,
it's petty. It's ridiculous. It's the beast. Come on, dude. What are you doing? Kind of thing. Yeah. But legally, he does have some kind of precedence to keep her. So therefore, when she takes his place, she's paying a debt. She's paying of some kind of. So it's more of a sacrifice than just, oh, this is just some injustice that I have to deal with, because the beast was letter of the law. Right. He had a legal reason.
It's kind of a Christ motif, really.
Yeah.
If you think about it, I mean, she says, take me instead, right? Mm-hmm. She satisfies the justice.
Well, it also tells the beast a lot about her character, because she's giving herself up for her father. So it's also telling the beast, this is a honorable woman. She's doing something. So it serves a story purpose, but also a character purpose.
Yes.
That, and it's interesting that you said that about the postmodern take, because I really kind of despised it, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Like, I'm like, that's such a wrong way to see this story. And then you just so eloquently, put it that if it was with Gaston, it would have been Stockholm Syndrome, because he would have terrorized her.
Yes.
Had he kept her. Whereas with the beast, because the beast is looking to improve himself, even if he's having a hard time doing it, he's still looking to do it.
And the one time he does terrorize her, she runs.
Yeah, and so it's not Stockholm Syndrome. She actually gets away.
Yeah, she leaves. So
yeah, but she goes, and it kind of goes back to that. Like, she goes into the, almost like it's going into the world where all the wolves are at, and maybe she was a little premature in her leaving him, and maybe if she can help him channel this beast within him, he will be worthy of her. It's all kind of intertwined that way.
And we've talked about this before, Trav, a lot about that, the virtuous monster, right?
Yes.
Well, the beast goes out and he has to unleash his monster to
fight the wolves.
protect Belle, right? Upon the wolves, right? So we see pretty quickly, we see where he unleashes his beast, his monster, in the wrong way, which is throwing a tantrum when Belle is in the West Wing. And then we see it be unleashed in the correct way to protect Belle upon the wolves. Yeah. And in fact, I love the scene where the little snippet where he grabs the wolf and he yells at it.
Yeah.
And it's basically there, that is showing he's one and the same. He's basically them. He's meeting them in their monstrous form.
Yes.
And
that's what's so great. And this appeals to men because men want to be the beast that is fighting the monster, or the monster that's fighting the beast, or the monster that's fighting the wolves. They want to be that. They desire to be that. It's only society has pushed them away from that responsibility. We live in a society where men don't need to protect anymore. It's all what have you said before, Michael, where it's all like you call a plumber when you need a plumbing job, you call a mechanic when you need a mechanic job. There's no it's all outsourced.
Yeah, the society with men, they've kind of tried to sterilize them, I guess would be a good, of any kind of violent tendency. And the sad thing about it is that violent has become kind of a bad word, but context makes violence matter, or dangerous, or anger. You can, like Michael, you said about the beast, if when he was lashing out at Belle, she runs. Anything would run from a dangerous beast of a man. But when he steps in with the wolves fight, then run. But if you notice in that scene, she cowers beneath him. She lets him fight those wolves. And as a girl, honestly, I tell people all the time, I actually I'm attracted to men with tempers, but I'm attracted to men with controlled tempers, because anger, I think there's a quote, and I want to say it's by Abraham Lincoln, but I may be wrong here, so take that with a grain of salt. But there is a quote that says, "You'll know a man not by what he is angry at." And so when a woman, at least most women I know, when they see a man become aggressive, even to the point of violence in protecting what they love or what is important, it is a huge attraction. While somebody, and you can do that with words, you can do that with a pen, you could do that physically, but now it's almost like men know your place, we can handle ourselves. And we can handle ourselves in certain aspects, but once we take out the dual existence of men in women's lives, we're in trouble, because men need women and women do need men. And it's this sad thing that they've tried to tell men, any violent tendency, get rid of it. Any angry tendency, get rid of it. Any violent tendency, get rid of it. Rather than saying, like in Beauty and the Beast, control it. Know when to use it. Know when it is appropriate. Because if a man comes up to me in public and slugs me in the face, that's violence. But the man who slugs him back at protecting me is also violence, but one is morally correct and one is morally wrong.
Wow. Amen to that. That's why we had you on, Heather. That's a nugget right there. I'll tell you. Gave me chills listening to you.
And this is I would say that this is so well pointed out. And I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, Heather, Sound of Freedom.
I haven't seen it yet, no.
But in that, we're in a day and age where definitely weak men can be beasts in allowing themselves to consume the child trafficking, right? And the story of Sound of Freedom is strong men, you know, using that aggression within them to go out there, find those beasts and bring them to justice, right? To find those wolves. So it's a real life kind of story of taking that masculine, that masculine part of us, right? And I think with our day and age of just chivalry is dead, women not wanting chivalry, like that
goes back to the appreciation.
This is going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Not justifying it at all, but I'm just saying that you remove the call for men to be the virtuous monster, the better monster, right? The monster that's going to fight the wolves, and using that aggression in the right way. Like you said, Heather, if somebody comes and and punches you, that's wrong aggression. But the man who stands up to punch the other guy and to protect you, that's right aggression.
Yeah.
So there's places for it
and
in
this
our
is
society.
And this is probably indicative of a bigger problem in our society where right and wrong are no longer a thing.
Yeah.
It's only the perspective, right? So we've heard this all over. Like they had an actor who was doing press for one of the Star Wars things, and they asked about the dark side and the light side of the Force, and this actor was like, I don't think this is about the dark side or the light side. Star Wars is about perspective. And it's like, what? It's all about the dark side and the light side. And this is why, so I think this is indicative of a bigger issue in our society where there is no right or wrong. There's only about perspective. And it's like, no, there are bad people out there and there are good people out there, and they need to have enough of a monster in them to fight the bad.
Right. They need to have that. And there's it ties back in, but Michael, you said chivalry is dead. There's an old quote that says chivalry is not dead, it just went to wherever ladylike went. Because
that's perfect.
I told somebody once that, because they were going off on the patriarchy, and I told them, I was like, yeah, there's a patriarchy, and guess who ran it for millennia? Women. And they were shocked when I said that. I was like, in the past, because they were saying, well, women weren't allowed to go to war. And I was like, who did they go to war for? In the story of Helen of Troy, a woman launches 10,000 ships. In Queen Elizabeth I, the Spanish Armada, a woman in history was the only one who could command an army to go to war for her without picking up a weapon. She could have men fight back and forth. That's why, honestly, in my personal opinion, the queen is the most powerful piece on a chessboard. And everybody talks about toxic masculinity today, and how, oh, well, men just need to get down. I was like, toxic femininity is when you know that power and you abuse it. It's when a woman is able, for instance, Belle, she could have very easily gone with Gaston, and she could have been everything he wanted. She could have tweaked him, saying, well, you can take over this part of the town. You can do this. I would like a new house. I want position. She could goad him to be even more wicked than he ever would have been if she had him decide. Or she could be, as in the story, Belle, who inspires. It goes back to that a woman cannot inspire a man to be what he chooses not to be, but a greater version. So women can pick a man. And you see this
Lady Macbeth.
Lady Macbeth, yeah, and you can control. So when people say, oh, the patriarchy is just keeping women down, I was like, if you know how to be a woman, it's very easy to break a man. I remember somebody asking me a long time ago, because there was a very, very sweet guy who wanted to date me, and I said no. And they were saying, why? You thought he was so sweet, he was so nice. And I was like, because I know the tendency within myself, I would end up controlling him so easily. It would have been so easy to where I was always in control. I was the one who would go to him to do what I wanted him to do. And I didn't want to become that woman. And I knew that tendency at the time. So I pulled back. And you have to control that femininity as well, because you see it today with a lot of these feminists out there screaming. And then what do you get? You get these weak men coming up and supporting them. You sure behave badly. Sure, do whatever. You are perfect the way you are. You're wonderful. And they just go their lengths. And that's why, personally, I don't ever trust a man who claims he's a feminist, because it's like, all you're going to do is say, yes, ma'am, whatever you meant, and you become the fool. And it's really, really sad. So when anybody ever says, oh, well, men are monsters, they are doing this, you're like, yeah, but Belle, at any time she was in danger, from then on out, could have said, beast, something happened. Beast. And it could be anything from him walking up to a guy and say, stay away from my wife, to walking up to a guy and slugging his lights out because he touched his wife, And so women have a lot of power behind the patriarchy, and a lot of people today just can't see that. Again, we're equals. We just, one's a little bit more silent in the background and one more in the foreground.
Wow.
Thanks, Heather, for being on. Appreciate
Thank you for having me on.
We'll be back next time. We'll keep talking about this Beauty and the Beast and the crisis of masculinity and the crisis of femininity.
Yeah, this will be our part 1, and we will have a part 2. Michael, what are our social media stuff?
So follow us on Twitter at Brothers V Random. We're on Instagram as the Brothers Random, Facebook, the Brothers Random. Follow us on, we're on Rumble, the Brothers Random. You can email us, the Brothers Random V at Gmail.
And we are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please go there and leave us a nice comment. We have one really bad comment, and and we're looking for good ones. So if you enjoy this show, please go do that. Look for the sword in the skull. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Heather. Thank you very much. We will continue this in our part 2. Keep reading, keep listening, keep watching, learn more. Thanks, guys.